I can't believe that I'm doing this right now. Am I actually doing this right now? Am I seriously actually doing this right now? Oh my god, I guess I am. Hello everyone, Stuckery here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. On today's episode, I'm going to be telling you about something that is truly insane, something that I'm sure that many of you who are watching are already kind of aware of, or at least, the fact that it existed. And I say that with past tense, even though I know this is not past tense, it is still something that is going on to this day, and it is honestly infuriating to me. It is the History Channel show Ancient Aliens. You already know. You've seen the title, you've seen everything in here, you know exactly what it is that we're going to be getting into today. But this is a show that has persisted for 19 seasons. 19! Starting back in like 2009, 2010, I'm sure that a lot of you, again, who are watching this are already aware of, you know exactly what it is that we're talking about here. It's aliens! I am sure that it is not a surprise to anyone who is watching this right now, considering the topics that I have covered on this History Channel, but History Channel's Ancient Aliens is wrong. Not only is it wrong, it's insultingly crazy. Oh my god, are you serious? There's an episode that is saying that the Vikings might be extraterrestrial gods. Are you Okay, I understand that it's probably talking about the mythology of it, and I haven't even seen the episode, but just right off the bat, the clickbaity titles on every single one of these episodes just pisses me off fundamentally. But everyone, before we go ahead and dive into the history, I wanted to thank today's sponsor and dive into my own history a little bit using today's sponsor, MyHeritage. Because MyHeritage, the company, is the leading global service for family history research and DNA testing. It's honestly pretty fun, it's really easy to use, and it's incredibly useful for trying to build your own family history tree, and you're able to dive into this super quick, which is why I was able to start doing my own to kind of show to you all. Once I put in my own information, that of my parents, and also my grandparents for both sides, everything from MyHeritage pretty much took the rest of the job from me and filled this thing out incredibly fast. There's actually this option here under Discoveries, which is Instant Discoveries, which that went ahead and linked me with all these different family members going back generations that I had no idea existed in the first place. And so I managed to discover that my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is actually from Norway, and that's where a whole line of my family is from. I didn't even realize that we had Scandinavian in us. I thought that we were primarily Germanic and Irish. But no, 3 greats ago, apparently I had family that came over from Denmark as well. And from my understandings of my own family, I thought that the oldest my family went back in the United States was back to coming over around the Irish potato famine. But no, I had family up in New York and Connecticut as early as like the 1790s. I don't think anyone in my family had any idea about any of this, and it was just incredible to discover. And check this out, once I actually have a match in the tree, I'm able to go over here to Documents, and then if there are any records that have been found with any of my relatives in that, I can simply review the match and then attach all of that information to the findings that I already have in my family tree. On top of all of this, you're able to colorize and animate old photos, bringing back people to life that have long been gone. It's truly insane. This is honestly incredible, and I'm telling you all right now that you should do this as well. If you click the link down in my description, then not only are you going to be getting a 14-day free trial, but simultaneously you're going to be getting 50% off the service. So come on guys, sign up. Who knows, maybe a number of you who are out there are actually related to me, and I have no idea, and you don't either. Let's find out together. But no, it's not Vikings that we're going to be talking about here today, though I swear to God, that might actually be an episode that we're going to be doing here in the future for a debunking of each episode that they create of this thing, though I'm pretty sure that my brain will melt by that point. You can already see from the image behind me that we're today going to be talking about pyramids, and how they were not made by aliens or any weird space technology. That does not make sense. History Channel. But okay, you all know how it is that I roll. The thing that I like to explain for anything is context. And so to explain the context of what it is that we're going to be talking about here today, I'm going to need to explain a little bit of the actual history of the History Channel here, or rather Ancient Aliens, and what exactly this is, for anyone who somehow does not know what this thing is. To start off telling the story, Ancient Aliens got its start on the History Channel back in the year 2009 as around a 2-hour documentary on the History Channel. And I say that with all the enunciation that I do and probably a lot of air quotes, because every time that I call this thing a documentary, it's like a drinking game that I really want to continue to drink so that I never wake up in this world. This whole show came about during a time when the History Channel had gradually began to change its format, less to history documentaries and things that it had covered before, to reality shows, as well as things that were more pseudoscience and pseudo-history. The History Channel became less about trying to teach people things and more so just about entertaining them and holding their attention, much in the same way as you would see for any number of prank videos or other things on YouTube that utilize clickbaity titles and thumbnails tutorials to try and bring you in, and then you find out after watching them that they didn't actually say or do anything of substance at all. The premise of this documentary, if again we want to go ahead and use that term in the first place, is that aliens had visited Earth in ancient times in order to introduce a variety of different things: technology, math, language, all sorts of things that are needed for a civilization to multiple different societies all across Earth. And if you ask for evidence of this, the evidence that they often present comes in the forms of different types of religious figures, architecture, things like that from around the world that they say, nope, this is not something that was created or imagined by human minds and hands. This had to have come from the outside. Things like the pyramids and Stonehenge and all that other kind of stuff, of which, mind you, they show no actual evidence over the course of this, just assertions with things that may be kind of related, and then smush it all together that we're going to be talking about that for the specific claims that they make in here, because oh my god, it gets bad. It gets really bad. You, good sir, bother me. And there's a key reason why I'm saying that individuals in the show really bother me, and it really has to do with how they present the information. The information half the time. The show is so bad at being historical that the way that they frame events and talk about events in the past is that they will utilize vague terminology, things like prehistoric times, ancient ancestors, these kinds of things. Forget using any kind of specific dates when talking about a point, when obviously they can't. They rarely ever use relative time periods in order to be able to talk about it, because you can't give anything specific, because if you do, then your argument immediately begins to fall apart, because then people start looking for those dates. Like really, how can you call yourself an educator or a historian or anything like that when you can't even give more specific time periods, like the Bronze Age or the Iron Age? Because if you're talking about something and saying just the words ancient times, I don't think many people understand just how broad of a time period that could potentially be. Because we could be talking about at that point 3000 BC, we could be talking around 100 AD, or we could be talking about 5 years ago if you ask my daughter and she calls me old, because that's what happens when you have a 4-year-old. Everyone is old to you at that point, relatively. Either way, historians and more reputable people over the years have blasted the show both for its blatant lack of evidence and its use of fast-paced formats in order to try and confuse as well as convince its audience of just nonsensical ideas. It's kind of like that thing that happens when you're watching a TikTok or other short-form content that doesn't really do anything to explain a topic to you. It just presents information to you as rapidly as it can in order to deliver it, in order to try and capture your attention. And it does because of how quickly it's delivered, but it doesn't actually say anything of substance. That's effectively what this does, by moving rapidly between topics so that you can't really focus on any one individual thing, and giving you vague enough information that it kind of hooks you, but doesn't actually give you any evidence of it. To be honest, especially as I bring up something like TikTok, I can't necessarily 100% blame the show, or rather the studio and History Channel, for what it is that they were trying to do here. I really can't, because I understand it. I get it. Like, the reason why they would air such a frivolous and outright inaccurate show is just in order to try and get as many viewers as possible, to sensationalize things and draw in their attention. That is the name of the game when it comes to things like social media, and right around 2009, 2010, the History Channel probably saw this way earlier than what other cable channels did, and really tried to latch onto that. But man, do I really miss the old days of the History Channel, back when it would show different things of how something was made, or how something came to be. And now everything on the History Channel just seems to be filled with shows like Vikings, which you probably all have already seen the previous video did, that explore the inaccuracies of the show Vikings, of which there are plenty. But that really is all the History Channel is now. It's the nonsensical stuff, it's the reality shows, it's all of these different things that don't have any educational substance. Well, I say that, but then of course there's that whole time period where every single documentary that they seem to produce focused on the Angry Mustache Man, which is a whole other thing that they did in order to try and galvanize attention. But either way, in order to get back onto the topic that we meant to talk about here in the first place, one of the most common things that Ancient Aliens just really loves to bring up all the time is that the pyramids are clear examples of the ancient peoples being inspired or helped or affected by aliens. Which, honestly, I am saying this right now, but that has got to be one of the most insulting things that you could possibly do. Because imagine if you will, you are an Egyptian laborer who has spent your entire life working on the pyramids. You are a professional, you are an artisan, you are a skilled laborer who has been paid for in food and beer, which is, for anyone unaware of exactly how these laborers in ancient times were paid, that is how ancient Egyptians were paid, was in food and beer, because that was currency. And then 4,000 years later, you have these guys come along and say, yeah, there's no way that you could have done that. That's simply impossible. It had to have been some guy from Mars who came came down and helped you instead. You were simply too dumb and weak to be able to do that. Simply frickin' infuriating. Either way, on that note, we need to go ahead and clarify something here. What pyramids are we talking about in the first place that these History Channel people are saying was, in fact, the aliens that made them? Well, the most known pyramids in Egypt are the 3 large pyramids in Giza. These pyramids of Giza are easily the most famous among all of them, but many people don't realize that there are actually many more pyramids that go throughout all of Egypt and even going down into Sudan that were built by varying peoples and different rulers over varying dynasties. But the 3 pyramids that we're talking about here are the funeral tombs of the pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. The pharaohs that we're talking about here are from the Old Kingdom of Egypt, which was from 2650 BC to 2150 BC, and these pyramids range from 451 feet to 203 feet today. These pyramids are probably the ones that you were thinking of when I say Egypt, and if that is the case, if that's what you're thinking, then you wouldn't be wrong. It is simply mind-boggling that these monuments were made without modern technology, but that does not mean that it is not possible. I am stressing that right now. It only makes it more amazing that they did so in the first place. And even then, while what we see today is indeed amazing, they would have looked even more incredible back in the day when they were first made, as each of these were covered with a polished white limestone cover and topped with a pyramidion, which is a cornerstone of gold, or electrum, which is a gold and silver alloy. These things would have been brilliant. But alright, the things that you saw behind me before were the pyramids, which we are saying were tombs. But what does Ancient Aliens say? I kid you not, one of the weirdest theories that goes into Ancient Aliens is that the ancient pyramids were actually some type of battery or power plant or something like that. Hell, there's even statements that it was actually a communication device. Again, how? It's pretty crazy when you go and look at the theory, but then you remember something very simple. We know what the inside of the pyramids look like. Like, we have seen them and been in them. I mean, I personally have not been in the pyramids, though that's one of the things that I plan on doing in the future here when I lead a trip to Egypt. But by all accounts, the pyramids of Egypt are made of very specific things. They are made of limestone, granite, mortar, and a cap that used to be at the top of gold or the gold-silver alloy of electrum, and tunnels leading to multiple rooms for the sarcophagus and other material. To my knowledge, and I would love, absolutely love, if anyone in the comment section would be able to point me where it is that these things have been found, but so far we have found no kind of lines, electrical or otherwise, of any type that could possibly lead to some form of communication or electrical transfer or anything like that. And while gold and limestone are conductors, granite most certainly is not. And so even if there was electricity that was running through the pyramids, there is no circuit or any kind of array that would allow for any movement other than possibly grounding a lightning strike, and that's it. And like, I did a video on this already, but one of the ideas that they bring up in order to make this argument is that they talk about the Baghdad battery, which again, I did a video on it and explained why that whole thing is bunkus. But they bring it up as an example of ancient alien technology that can produce electricity because the Baghdad battery is capable of producing 4 volts of electricity. But there are many problems with the idea in the first place, as again, I have talked about. The Baghdad battery as it is incredibly small, and so it can't actually hold much electricity in the first place to power anything for that matter. And so to be useful as an actual battery, it would have to be hundreds of times larger than what it actually is. And so there really is no way that the Baghdad battery could actually be used to power anything like an ancient communication device or anything like that. It doesn't make sense. Even with the most efficient tool you possibly could have, it's not going to work. And also, if you have something that is that efficient, why utilize something like the Baghdad battery? That doesn't make any sense. You clearly have the technology at that point for something better. Why use that? Secondly, when they bring up the Baghdad battery and this argument for the pyramids possibly having been a power station, then the time just does not make any sense whatsoever because these things are thousands of years apart. The Baghdad battery was discovered over here in Iraq and is believed to date back to the Parthian or the Sasanian Empire, as in around 150 to 650 AD, while the pyramids of the Old Kingdom are more around 2500 BC, so it is quite literally 2500 to 3,000 years prior. That, and not to mention like 800 miles, so it does not make any kind of sense. But you know what? They're in the same kind of region, I guess. Not only does Ancient Aliens think that Egyptians had power, but they also think that they had a light bulb, which is actually the image that you can see behind me right here, which is from Season 5, Episode 3, at around 10 minutes and 45 seconds into the episode. What they did was create a light bulb that looks kind of like hieroglyphics that had been seen at the Temple of Hathor, but this thing is is not a light bulb, no matter what it is that anyone tries to tell you that it is. That's not the case. It may look kind of like a light bulb, but it's not. This thing is actually part of the creation myth of Egypt, and that is in fact a snake that is emerging from a flower. And like that ties into how Egypt was made in the first place. It's not a freaking light bulb. Like, look down here, you even see petals. Like there's nothing that you would screw anything into. These are freaking flower petals, man. And look at this up at the top. You see this? See the little hinged jaw? See the little eye? That's a snake, not a filament. Like, you don't even have to guess. You can really just look at the thing and know. But seriously, the stories of how they try to tie all of this together is truly insane. And it's not even something that fits into one episode. It's something that is fit over multiple episodes, and they keep on referring back to, because again, as I said from the beginning of this episode, there are 19 seasons of this. And you know what they say about a lie? If you regurgitate it long enough, people will eventually start to believe it. But okay, if we're actually going to want to understand the history of pyramids, we're going to need to look at the history of them to really know what it is that we're talking about. And along with them, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. My friends, one of the things that you will see online when you were talking about ancient alien theory is people saying, hey, yeah, the pyramids were never tombs. The Egyptians had other tombs, which is to a degree true. The pyramids were tombs, they were, but the Egyptians did have other tombs. We may think of the pyramids being the classic example of Egypt, and every pharaoh was buried inside of his own pyramid, but that is not the case. Very few rulers ever actually had a pyramid that they were buried in. Before there were ever pyramids, the Egyptian pharaohs were buried in these things called mastabas, which means house of eternity or eternal house. These were an ancient tomb made of a rectangular room with an inward sloping wall and a flat roof. Early forms of these mastabas were made out of mud brick, and in some of the later cases, stone if you could afford it. This structure was found from the pre-dynastic period going all the way into the Old Kingdom, and these structures would be facing north to south as the Egyptians believed it would allow access for the deceased to the afterlife. When you would look inside of the mastabas, there would be this kind of false door that was there for the deceased to take to the afterlife, and it was also there for people to leave offerings, so it was a kind of gateway or portal in the religious sense. And then finally, for the structure, there would be two cellars, one of which would contain the deceased, and a smaller one which would house food and other items that were meant for the deceased in the afterlife. That is how the Egyptians operated when it came to the afterlife, but the way that Ancient Aliens presents things. There's this whole segment in Season 5, Episode 1, when it's talking about pyramids that are all over the world. And it says, how is it possible that civilization spread out over 5 continents all built similar pyramidal structures? Most pyramids were constructed by builders who possessed the same advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and the Earth's geophysical properties. Like, okay, they ask this question of how? How would ancient people be able to do something like this? And then I kid you not, literally a minute before it even asks this question in the first place, it answers its own question. It literally says a minute earlier when talking about the architectural stability of shapes that says, if you want to make anything that is going to be tall, it has to be a pyramid. Like, oh my God, I'm laughing right now, but you can't even make this up. It genuinely answered its own question because, yes, the triangle, for anyone who is not familiar with shapes and geography, anything like that, the triangle is the strongest shape. And from that, when talking about 3D shapes, the pyramid is the strongest shape with the least amount of weaknesses. Like, damn it, they answered their own question in like the minute. Like, oh my God, they actually I don't think that I could write a better comedy line. I really don't. So all of this, when talking about funerary rites and tombs and things like that, this begins to change going into the Old Kingdom period of Egypt. This time period was something that was known as the Age of Pyramid Builders, and for good reason. This is the time period where the pyramids of Giza were constructed. It lasts from around 2700 BC to 2200 BC and would consist of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th dynasties before ultimately declining into the First Intermediate period. And when it comes to the building of these pyramids, it is not thanks to ancient aliens, like these guys would have you believe. No, instead it is most likely this guy, though I would understand you being a little bit confused and thinking, wow, no, is that an alien? No, that's ancient Egyptian art, and that's a person. That's Imhotep. That is the guy who is credited by Egyptologists for being the designer and architect of the first pyramid. the Djoser Step Pyramid. Which for anyone looking at this, you're probably thinking, hey, wait, that doesn't exactly look like a regular pyramid. Like, yes, it is somewhat pyramidal in shape, but this thing it's not smooth down all the sides. And yes, that's because it is a step pyramid. Don't make any stepbrother jokes or about them getting stuck, please. I swear to God, I know what is going to happen to the comments section right now. No, that thing is the first pyramid, and you have to understand just how incredibly impressive and badass this guy was. He is one of the few non-pharaohs that was actually deified. He was turned into a god by the Egyptian people. And the very use of grand-scale stone architecture, that is attributed to him. Not just like mud bricks, stone is him. Imhotep is a guy who would later be considered to be the god of medicine, and is oftentimes equated with the other Egyptian god, Thoth, who is the god of mathematics, architecture, and medicine himself. Genuinely, imagine just how impressive this is. You are a guy who decides, hey, you know what, we're going to go ahead and use rocks instead of mud brick, and it's such an impressive idea to the people around you that they say, man, this guy is so smart, he's a god. So this early pyramid, the Pyramid of Djoser, ends up getting made with the help of Imhotep. And the whole thing is a very simplistic idea that is based off earlier models of funeral homes that were used. I mean, look at the shape of this thing, and then go back and look at the mastabas. This entire construction was just, hey, what if we took a whole bunch of mastabas and just stacked them on top of each other? That's it. The thing that would really separate them at that point is A, their size, as now we're talking about something that is much bigger in the first place than a standard mastaba, and the fact that it was made out of stone and not just the standard mud brick. This is the first step to creating the pyramids that we think of today, which were not going to be something that were made until the 4th dynasty. The next 3 pyramids that came after these step pyramids are the ones that were made for Pharaoh Sneferu. And if you're going and looking at things, then these are a prime example that are going to be able to show the experimentation that was used over time to be able to develop the idea of building a pyramid. Because these things failed. And I'll explain what it is that I mean. The pyramids that we're talking about now are the Meidum Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid. The Meidum Pyramid that you can see behind me here, this was the pyramid that is thought to have been made after that original step pyramid that we showed. And this is something that was started by the last pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty, Huni, and was then continued by the pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, Sneferu. The funny thing about this is that this pyramid was supposed to initially have been a step pyramid, and then it was supposed to have been cased by limestone in order to try and create a straight side. However, from archaeological evidence, we can see that this pyramid ran into a whole bunch of problems when they were trying creating it in the first place, which meant that it had a lot of issues with its foundation and its stability, which then led to an entire collapse of the pyramid, and of course, from that point, it was discontinued. If they just did not bother trying to finish this thing, which, my God, can you imagine the amount of effort that went into create something like this? And then partway through, they're just like, crap, we can't do anything. With the lessons that they learned from that first pyramid, though, they were then able to go and start building the second pyramid, the Bent Pyramid. This was the second one to be built during Sneferu's reign, and what is interesting about this pyramid is that they learned that a man-made foundation, if you put that underneath the pyramid, then this was something that was going to increase its stability and decrease the likelihood that the entire thing collapses on you. But the issue, it seems, as you can see from how it is bent partway towards the top, is that they realized partway through that the angle that they were constructing the thing in was not actually correct, and so it wasn't able to be completed properly in a proper pyramid shape. So eventually there wasn't anything that they could do until the top part of it would just collapse. Which then, from all of this, brings us to the final pyramid that was built during Sneferu's reign, the Red Pyramid. And this, in comparison to the other two that I talked about, was the first successful pyramid that was built in the classic style of what we think of as a pyramid. I say successful because this is the only one among the other two that did not collapse. The way that they did this was that in comparison to the previous sheer sides that you can see of the lower part of the Bent Pyramid, they instead built the entire thing as they did the top here, with the Red Pyramid having been built at a 43-degree angle. So in the end, after multiple tries and errors, they finally figured out how it is that they would be able to construct one of these. And since I am talking about the Red Pyramid now, I honestly feel like I should say that the whole reason why this thing is called the Red Pyramid is because of its coloration, obviously, but simultaneously, this is not the original color that this thing was. No, instead, the original pyramid was white because it had been made on the outside of Tura limestone, but this, over the years, was removed going into the medieval period and sent off to Cairo, leaving the red limestone underneath. And so it is, my friends, that after the success of the Red Pyramid, that they finally got the style down, and pharaohs began to realize that they could create bigger and grander projects, grander pyramids to show off their power, their wealth, their prestige. and this is where the Great Pyramids of Giza finally comes in. Sneferu's successor, Khufu, would go on to create the largest pyramid in Egypt, known as the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is considered on the 7 wonders of the ancient world, standing at a grand total of 481 feet at its prime. Following this was Khafre's pyramid at 448 feet at its prime, and the smallest of the three was the Pyramid of Menkaure, which stood at a measly 213 feet in comparison. When a person is talking about pyramids, obviously they are thinking of the Great Pyramids of Giza. This is a representation of Egypt itself, in particular ancient Egypt. But as I've covered with going into the actual history of pyramids, these are not the only pyramids in Egypt. In fact, there are 118 pyramids that have been discovered in Egypt, with a number of them having been buried in the desert or stripped down to their very foundation, and the parts of them, the stone, being hauled off for other construction projects. It's very easy to see from looking at this, from seeing the actual trial and error that occurred, that this technology, these techniques, none of this stuff came from any alien race. It came from the experimentation and ingenuity of human hands and minds. The entire thing coming from ancient aliens is just incredibly insulting. But of course, this is going to lead us to the last two questions that Ancient Aliens raises, and those can be answered at the exact same time. In Season 5, Episode 1, when they are talking about the pyramids, they specifically say that, hey, no body has ever been found inside of the pyramids. Why is that the case if these are a tomb? And also, at the same time, if these are a tomb, then why did the ancient Egyptians stop making pyramids in the first place since they were so grand? And the answer is very logical and very simple. It's more than likely grave robbers. As I mentioned earlier with the history of Egypt, it was not one continuous kingdom, but rather 3 different kingdoms that had many different dynasties inside each of them that were all vying for power at different points over the course of its history. And simultaneously, though I say the old, the middle, and the new kingdom, there were intermediate periods between those where everything inside of it fell into chaos. Based on the written records of this time, the first intermediate period was when the power balance in Egypt simply fell apart, as the empire fell into 2 kinds of distinct power bases, one that we saw in Lower Egypt and the other in Upper Egypt, and it is over this time period that you would have seen incredible amounts of destruction and civil unrest, which then makes it the perfect opportunity for any grave robbers to come in and steal things for multitude of whatever reasons, either potentially to feed themselves and sell off the goods, or to feed their armies by selling off the gold and other material in order to buy more war material that is needed for one's conquests. Go figure, during a time of war and chaos, monuments aren't exactly the most crucial thing to have at that time. What you need is an army. And if you were an ancient Egyptian and you saw the original pyramids, the things that were shining white, covered with a literal cap of gold, and you know for a fact that these things are filled with massive amounts of treasure, then what that means is that when you have a gigantic pyramid in the middle of the desert that can be seen by anyone and everyone as a massive sign of power, prestige, and wealth, then what you've essentially created is a massive sign of, please rob me, I'm dead and won't be able to protect myself anymore. So of course it's the perfect opportunity for someone to try and break in, and even if this does not occur during the first intermediate period, there is still an additional 2,000 years in which this could have taken place. The later pharaohs who would come after would realize this, and this is the reason why they would start to make stelas and temples in order to try and have their names remembered, and they would instead have their tombs hidden in order to try and prevent their looting, which is why areas such as the Valley of the Kings exists in the first place. And it is on that note that is why King Tut is so incredibly famous, or Tutankhamun, because even though King Tut had no actual real historical significance, he wasn't an important ruler, he wasn't a powerful ruler, he didn't do anything that was crazy or important of any kind of real degree, his influence in real life pales in comparison to the influence that his death has, because he is the only royal burial that has been found completely intact with all of his belongings. And not only are the gold and jewels and everything else that have been found inside of these tombs incredibly valuable, but simultaneously, mummies themselves have been used for a variety of things over the course of history, as fuel for locomotives, as fertilizer, as paint in the 1800s, and for different medicinal purposes going back thousands of years. That is a very clear and obvious sign as to why some bodies would just not be found, because they would have been used. Considering the amount of gold that were in tombs like this, there have been cases where grave robbers would light tombs on fire in order to try and melt as much of the gold as possible and destroy other things around them to be able to make transportation of such precious items significantly easier. The downside, of course, from this is literally destroying all of the artifacts that people nowadays want to be able to see. So yeah, Ancient Aliens, there's a very key and distinct reason as to why bodies have not been found, okay? It's not aliens. It's not. But my friends, that is going to conclude my bashing of Ancient Aliens and their explanation about the pyramids, or lack thereof. I will go ahead and say this here at the end for everyone who has continued to watch up to this point. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Stakui with the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. I ask that you like, comment, and subscribe, and please let me know down in the comment section below what it is that we should do next. I'm genuinely considering, after having made this, that one of the things that we could do, as much as I may possibly regret it, is that we could do a large deep dive into Ancient Aliens and other conspiracies and the real history behind these things as well. I don't even know what it is that I'm saying at that point. It makes me even nervous postulating that idea because there are 19 seasons of Ancient Alien. 19. So if you all want to see me go through that, whether it's episode by episode or season by season, and just breaking down the arguments of different things that have been presented, such as that one that I showed in the beginning about possibly having alien influence for the Vikings or others, then by all means let me know, as it could be a crazy thing just like what we did with Cleopatra or the other Netflix series. So anyway, thank you all for watching. Please let me know what it is that we should do, and if that is something that I see repeated over and over again in the comments, I'm probably going to put out a poll to determine what it is that we would do on my community page. I appreciate all of you, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, my friends.